Not 6 yet. Good evening, and welcome to the Zoning Board of Adjustments meeting for May 1st, 2025. I would like to call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. We do have a quorum of 5 members. Our first order of business is to approve minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes for April 3rd, 2025? It's been motioned. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been motioned and second. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Motion carries 5-0. We would like to move into our regular agenda. This is a consideration and possible action of VAZ 2025-0109, change in non-conforming status for the resumption of a previously abandoned non-conforming use. This is a request by Nate Pierre, applicant and owner, for approval for a change in non-conforming status as permitted by the Unified Development Code, ordinance number 2000-T, to allow for the resumption of a non-conforming use previously abandoned. This has a general location of 2223 North San Antonio Avenue. We have a staff report.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Patrick Bauer, and I'll be making the request tonight and presenting the staff report. So as mentioned, the request is for the resumption of a previously abandoned non-conforming use, and this is within the Old Town area, specifically the Old Town Residential Zoning District. And if you'll remember this, a similar request came before y'all at the August 15th, 2024 ZBA meeting. So some of these things may seem very, very similar or very, you may remember them, but it's been 6 months, or actually more than 6 months now, more 9 months. So you may not remember everything. So just kind of go through the summary of the request. It's to allow for that previous 3 dwelling family unit use to be resumed on the site. And as you'll see with the site plan, the site has 2 buildings. One's a 1-story building with 1 unit, and then a 2-story building, which has 2 units, but they're all on the same property. And so that use currently for our code is classified as the dwelling multifamily use. And the dwelling multifamily use is not a permitted use in the Old Town Residential District, but it was previously, as I'll be noting later on, permitted whenever the zoning was the multifamily zoning for the property. And so the use has been abandoned on the site for more than 6 months. Thus, that's why the change in non-conforming status is being requested. And since that meeting, the applicant has identified that essentially trying to prepare the units for future renters. And the applicant has made some exterior and interior cosmetic improvements, which will be shown in later slides, as well as he's prepared 2 parking proposals to improve the off-street parking for the site. And so to date, staff has not received any comments in support or against the request. And kind of just going over this again, the subject property as well as everything around it is within that Old Town Residential Zoning District. And the uses, as you would expect, is predominantly single-family residences, but then we do see a mixture of duplexes within the area, with the duplexes up to the northeast of the property. And so a little bit of history on the property. It was annexed in 1959 with all of Old Town originally. It was then developed with those existing structures on the lot in 1983. And then the property was originally the multifamily zoning, as I mentioned, but then it was changed in 2006 to the Old Town Residential zoning whenever all of Old Town was being changed to the zoning that it is today. And as mentioned, just to reiterate again, that similar request was presented at the August 15th, 2024 ZBA meeting, and that request failed to pass by a vote of 3-2. And some of the concerns mentioned by the board were related to parking, and there was also a adjacent property owner that had come out kind of having concerns about the upkeep of the property. And so if you're going to look at the survey of the property as the footprint of how the property sits today, you'll see more in the middle of the property is that 1-story frame house, and we'll see that in the next slide. I actually have images, so you'll be able to see it a little better. But you have that 1-story frame house, the 2-story house with the 2 units and then the existing driveway. And so here we get a look at the subject property. These are images provided by the applicant. And so this first one, you can kind of see that 1-story building, then the 2-story building, and then the driveway meant for the parking of cars. And we get a closer look at that 2-story building with the 2 units. And additionally, the applicant provided some images of some of the improvements that are occurring on the inside and trying to prepare them for future renters of the space. And so as mentioned, one of the things that the applicant provided with their application was kind of trying to address some of the concerns previously of the board concerning parking. And so within Old Town Residential, stacked parking is allowed. And this specific use, the dwellings, they're required to have 2 spaces for every dwelling unit. So if you have 3 units total on the property, you need a total of 6 parking spaces. And so there's 2 options that the applicant has prepared. One is more of a stacked parking space option, which you see with driveways, but specifically Old Town Residential allows for stacked parking when you have this kind of multi-unit. And so the parking spaces would be 8 feet by 20 feet. And the applicant has shown that 8 stacked parking spaces could be fit on the lot. And then if you striped them, you could lay them out specifically for the specific unit. So maybe 1 through 2 are for unit 1, 3 through 5 for unit 2, etc. And then parking proposal number 2 focuses a little more, you can imagine, on a parking lot aspect. While it's still a driveway, you could lay it out to where you could fit 6 parking spaces, which being a parking space now and not a stacked, it can be 9 by 18 in dimension. And it would require some additional pavement to be poured so that you could put those parking spaces and then they have enough space to actually back out into the existing driveway to kind of get out. But with this option, you would also be designating, hey, these are the parking spaces for the specific units, and the 6 would cover the requirement for the number of units that are on the lot. And so looking at the approval criteria for a change in nonconforming status, staff found that the request met the approval criteria for the request. And as mentioned, the use was permitted previously when the property was that multifamily zoning prior to 2006. And it was truly whenever the zoning changed that it now became a nonconforming use. And it just was a nonconforming use on the property, but once abandoned, now it's off the site and it needs the change in nonconforming status to be essentially resumed on the site. And additionally, the applicant has also made cosmetic improvements and shown that he's trying to work on the property. And he's provided the different parking layouts to address the concerns from the previous public hearing. And so therefore, staff recommends approval of the requested change in nonconforming status. And kind of moving forward, the staff has the option to kind of look at the different parking options and take a different path based on what you may see as the best or most appropriate way of handling parking on the site. So if the board would desire to make the parking designs that were presented a part or a condition of approval of the request, then you can consider one of the conditions. You could either go with condition 1, that the parking proposal number 1, which is that stacked parking, be added to the approval, or parking proposal number 2, which had more of adding the pavement and creating more of a parking lot, kind of more parking lot style of handling the parking. And additionally, it should be noted that if the board believes that no parking amendment is required, then a condition is not required to be placed on approval of the request. So the board has different options to take into consideration as you consider the request presented. And that concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Patrick. Do we have an applicant presentation? Yes, sir. If you would, go to the podium and state your name and address.
Hello, my name is Nate Pierre, and I actually just moved into the property on the main unit. So 2223 North San Antonio is my address now.
You can, if you have a presentation or you would like to say something, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you. Yeah, we just wanted to come today. Like he was saying previously, I think it was like 6 to 8 months ago that we presented similar structures, similar ideas. We wanted to make sure we went the right way and did the permitting and all that stuff. So through that, honestly, we didn't really think that we would have an issue. I know there's a few board members that had a problem with the parking, and there were some concerns with the traffic coming in and out of the neighborhood. Directly across the street from us is another triplex. Behind that is a fourplex. And then, as he stated, there's a few other multifamilies in the neighborhood, a few duplexes here and there, a couple fourplexes here and there. So, yeah, we just wanted to present this and see if maybe if we fix something with the parking, or if there's some other concerns that we might be able to fix in order to get this done. Unfortunately, we are coming due pretty soon on our loan that is on there, so we need to get this done in order to move forward with a refinance.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have any persons wishing to speak for or against proposal? We'd like to now move into staff and commission applicant discussion. Any questions or comments to the staff or applicant from the board? Yes, sir.
Just curious, on the existing duplexes or triplexes, is the parking striped or?
Yeah, so not to date, as it's previously been used in the past. And I don't have it here. I think Nate had provided, I just didn't provide it here. But you can see there's a car here. And in this left-hand image, it is not striped right now. So it's more, people may have naturally just used it as you would expect. They would park in a manner that you're not messing with your neighbor and parking right in the middle so that no one can park. So you can't fit three. The striping would essentially give more of a, for lack of better, a definitive, this is your space, you park there. It still doesn't stop anyone. People park in weird places all over the time, even in parking lots. But it creates a definitive, these are your spaces for your unit.
Apologies if I misunderstood the question, but were you asking about this specific unit or the ones referenced by the applicant that are across the street and then behind it?
Correct.
Okay. I think the one across, Patrick, do you know the answer to the question?
Yeah, I haven't seen any striping for the ones across the street. It looks like it's just a standard driveway. And if you're looking at the site, you couldn't tell probably if it's 3 units, 2 units, 1 unit, because it just looks like a home with a garage apartment, which that could mean.
Sure.
I actually pulled up the Google Street View as you were asking the question because I did not know the answer to it. And what I see for the one directly across, there is additional parking that was provided. Not exactly the same as what Mr. Pierre is presenting, because that parking backs directly out onto the street. What Mr. Pierre would be presenting in option number 2 would actually, from a design perspective, reduce that back out directly onto the street that sometimes our engineering department expresses concerns about. So it's more similar to option number 2, directly across the street, than option number 1, or no striping at all.
Okay, thank you.
Can you show me option parking proposal number 1? Okay, so option parking proposal number 1 is essentially, the only change would be somebody would have to go in and paint those rectangular, okay.
And if the board decided that that's necessary to, for lack of better, tell people where they need to park, rather than just, hey, you park further over to the left, you park to the right, and then we get someone else down the middle. But it has the dimensions. It's I believe it's roughly 25 feet wide, so you can fit 3 8 by 20 parking spaces. 24 feet overall can fit in there. It's more just if the board sees this as a way to ensure that the parking meets it, then they can deem that. But this has been parked like this for years, and it's how it's been used for many years. So there has not been striping that I know of on the site to date.
All right, thank you, Patrick.
If I remember correctly, the August meeting, we discussed if car number 5 had to get out, how many people would have to back out into the street, and what kind of a, quote, log jam is that going to create? And then add into that mix, we have an emergency at the house next door or down the street, and vehicles trying to get to that emergency. The backing out, in my opinion, proposal 1 is not even an option, because it should be proposal 2 at least. Now, I got something to say about that too. Proposal 2, we're going to take up, quote, more green space. That's going to take away from the Old Town site vibe, for lack of better description. And so we're making the situation better, but we're actually taking more green space away. So is it going to be concrete? Are we going to do an alternative to concrete where grass can grow up through there's lots of different driving structures that you can drive on. So there's a lot to this that from a city engineering standpoint that I would point out. I guess that'd be the best way to say it. But I'm definitely, if it's going to get approved, I'm more in favor of 2 than I am 1. But I'm not in favor of it to start with. I think it's too many people on too small of a lot. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, no, I would reiterate that lots within this area are generally smaller. So traditionally, if this was done back in, originally this was 4 lots actually. So
Yeah.
back in the day, someone could have put 4 units. It would have been really skinny. But back in the day, how it was subdivided, and it actually, this Old Town does allow for you to do smaller lots than it gives the option to potentially plat lots that are smaller than your traditional 50-foot lot. So you see more density in this area in general. And I would just say, we did talk to engineering about this area, and given that it's a residential use, and if the lot was filled up more, it may create an issue, but given that the lot is not filled up to a level that would meet the threshold for requiring a swale or anything, that's where, because that's one of the thoughts we had, is we don't want to add additional pavement if it's just gonna cause a detention issue for the property. And I would also like to note, if proposal 1, if you think 8 is too many stacking spaces, you can say, hey, just do 6. You only need 6 on the property to cover that. So I would say if the 8 is still an issue for you, you can still do 6.
And it'll go back to the same conversation because you know how people park, especially it's whoever gets there first wins. So, and then that person needs to leave first and there's 5 cars behind them. And that's my whole concern. But we have an Old Town site that we have to deal with. So,
And Member Ioka, if I could, Old Town is currently being studied, and Old Town is one of the only places that back-out parking is allowed. So, this is a truly unique situation, and I think the reduction to 6 to meet the minimum is possibly a good alternative to allay the concern of having more concrete, reducing the character of the area, balancing all of those issues while not impeding the ability for a new user to come into this site and reuse a building that's quite in character with the area. I think previously there was some big discussion about the look and feel of it, and I think the applicant has done a good job in enhancing that character and making it more fitting for the area.
I don't disagree with anything you said.
Love it.
Yeah, amen. The one thing that always bothered me, and this is a question more than anything, not a statement. If a property is abandoned and not used, why should society give back that use if it doesn't meet the purpose of the zoning? So I have fundamental thoughts that I don't see why we're giving back that use. That's just my thoughts, and that's from being on planning and zoning before. So that's just my thoughts. But I know we're not here to decide that, and I realize that. So one last question I do have, and I missed it, I think, because you all went past the slide real fast. What was staff recommendations on this?
It was in favor.
It was in favor of it. Okay, good. That's all I needed to say. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board to the staff or applicant?
I have a question for the applicant.
If you would, sir, go to the podium so you can respond and they can hear your response. Yes, sir.
I have an issue with the stacking and parking 8-foot wide parking spaces are not wide enough for vehicles to be able to be used and get out without damaging the vehicle next to it. And the option number 2 seems to be more in tune with the parking requirement than trying to force this stacking parking. And there was talk about using different kinds of pavements or parking areas. But what I found in my experience anyways is that those normally decay fairly quickly. So are you open to doing the additional paving?
Yes, sir, of course.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was my only question.
If I may address something that was said earlier. So I know that there was concern about like the lines as far as who parks where. So if you look at like 1 and 2, that's pretty much if you park right in front of the stairs. The thought process that we had was, okay, that would be for the main house. And then I don't know if you can switch back over to the picture of the 2-story building. But, okay, so if you see the stairs and then at the bottom there's an opening with a pole down the middle and then there's one more pole to the far right. If you park right in front of where those squares are, that is almost like an invisible lineage straight down the parking lot all the way down to the street where you could park right in front of that and then not have an issue. We have actually filled up the parking lot in the past, and to be honest with you, there is quite a bit of room on either side, even with trucks there. So I just wanted to address that while I was up here, if that was okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board to the staff or applicant?
I would just encourage the board to have additional discussion now, only because I have only heard from a few people, and the last thing I want you to do is make a motion and then not be able to reach a consensus. So if other people have opinions now, I would encourage you to express those opinions now so that when a motion comes, we only have one vote and it happens, or we know that it's not going to happen, instead of multiple votes that fail.
I was going to bring it up in discussion. Any other questions or comments from the board to the staff? Okay, let's move into consideration and possible action. Would you put the motion? Gary, would you read the motion, please?
I make a motion to approve VAZ 2025-0109. May I change that? I make a motion to conditionally approve VAZ 2025-0109. My motion will include the contingency of utilizing parking proposal number 2.
It's been motioned. Is there a second? It's been motioned and second. Any discussion?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Could we consider parking proposal number 1 and eliminate 2 of the spaces?
So I would
I
like
don't
to.
see the big advantage.
Yes, sir. That is something that would be within the board's discretion. What I would encourage you to do is kind of, if that's what you wanted to do, if that's what the board wants to do, because the way that they're numbered on parking proposal number 1, it might be a little bit squirrely because 3 and 4 are kind of at the back.
Right.
So you might want to kind of say
And it would be
which 2 spots you would be removing.
3 and 4.
I would also like to have discussion on the fact of allowing the staff and applicant to come up with a ideal plan for the parking, since we're looking at this from our standpoint of view versus, there's some people brought up the losing the green. Other people brought up removing the 8, moving 2 to make 6. So just letting it go into the hands of the staff and the applicant to come up with something that's viable, I think that we should consider that in my discussion. What are any other thoughts on that, since we're having a discussion as well?
So you're your proposal, Mark, would be to, what would the proposal be?
The proposal would be to come up out of this meeting with either proposal, a parking proposal, period. That staff and the applicant can make sure it works for that area, because right now we have so many different viewpoints on that, and I think that staff has already addressed that, can address it for the applicant as well.
So if I can,
Yes.
I would maybe phrase that to be provide 6 parking spaces within the existing concrete area.
That's a bet. Thank you. That's a good way to phrase that. So instead of having the proposal, the motion that we've had on the table, to rephrase it to having a parking proposal with 6 parking spaces, and let staff and applicant come up with how that is drawn out the best way.
Before we vote, can I ask a question? For parallel parking, what is the aisle width requirement?
Not talking about a commercial lot.
I know, but it's still, I just like to know what it is.
So Old Town says that a stacking space area measures 8 feet by 20.
Yes. What is the aisle width?
25.
No, it's not 20.
Are we allowed to do that? I mean, just turn it over to staff and the applicant?
Well, we're talking
It would be a motion to amend.
Most, yeah.
But yes, sir, I think that you can delegate some of that authority and just put the bumper on what that authority is, and the bumper being create a parking plan that minimizes additional pavement, but at the same time provides 6 designated spaces, 2 for each residential unit.
Did somebody write that down? I make such a motion to amend my motion to that motion.
I think we're trying to get an answer to Commissioner Acosta's question first. And I apologize, I don't know what you mean by aisle. I assume with the way Martin's been searching, he knew that as a term of art. I don't know that as the term of art.
Basically, the dimension of the driveway where you drive to turn into the parking space. For 90-degree parking, it's 62 feet. The aisle would be about 26 feet. For parallel parking, is less. So my thought is that if we're going to eliminate parking space 3 and 4, I still believe that if we add a couple of feet of pavement, you would be able to achieve the parking and having a center aisle for people to move in and out without having to go to the neighbor and say, can you please move your car because I got to get out.
No, I understand where the concern is and where the desire is. Our parking table is for commercial sites and not necessarily for the Old Town area, which is where I'm kind of drawing a distinction in between the parallel space being 8 by 23 in, let's say, the previous site that we looked at last month off of Broadway and Yost. They were, I believe that site had parallel parking to it. It would have had that 8 by 23 with a 12-foot aisle requirement. This, as one of the sites in Old Town, and allows for that back out on an existing residential lot, there's not an aisle requirement. So you could have 2 rows and not necessarily have to have an aisle in between. But I think with removal of 3 and 4, and either I believe that there is some area. It may take a little bit of creative driving, and hopefully no one has an F-350, but I want to say that it can be done.
It can, but that's why I'm saying that if you add a couple of feet or 4 feet, whatever, that's a safe way to get out without spending a half an hour trying to maneuver your vehicle out of the way.
Again, that's why I'm proposing that we amend the motion to having a parking proposal for 6 spots would be best for coming from the staff and the applicant.
So
Let's also consider making it a final word is staff, though. Final word. Staff says yes or no, in other words.
I mean, because the applicant has been very cooperative on saying that if he needs to add concrete or not, or whatever he needs to do, that's what he's willing to do. So I think that for us discussing that in detail, we're I guess kind of defeating the purpose of what's overall is needed.
right, and I think at maximum, minimum, if we were to add concrete and to create that drive aisle, we've already got those blue squares as being 8 by 20. So 3 and 4 are 8 feet wide. If we need to have a one-way aisle be 12 feet, that's an additional 4 foot of concrete. So if, there would more than likely need to be some swale or something provided with the additional concrete, but it's also not the full concrete that proposal number 2 has. So that may be a good median to say, provide parking within the existing concrete area to have 6 spaces and a 12-foot aisle with up to 5 foot of additional concrete to parallel the existing drive. 1 foot of wiggle room.
It seems like we're in favor of approving it with the 6 parking spaces, and it might be best for us to let the engineering department determine what's best for the property, rather than us trying to pick option 1 or 2.
Right. That's
I think what I'm hearing is a motion to amend
right.
conditional approval of VARZ 2025-0109 on the condition that there are 6 designated parking places with the location determined and approved by staff.
Correct.
Correct.
Or did somebody mean to say so moved?
So moved. Is there any?
Is there a second?
There is a second.
There is a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Motion carries 5-0. We'd like to move into our second item on the agenda, consideration of possible action for VAZ 2025-0125, special exception to reduce the minimum transparency requirement for a change of use in an existing structure. A request by J Plus Incorporated, represented by Jeff Jennings, applicant, on behalf of SW Broadway LLC, represented by Chad Otten, owner, for approval of a special exception as permitted by the Unified Development Code, ordinance number 2000-T, to allow for a special exception for the change of use and related improvements required by section 4.1.3.2 to reduce the minimum required transparency of an existing structure as allowed by section 2.7.3.7. This has a general location of 2800 East Broadway Street, Pearland, Texas. Staff report.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be doing this one again. So the a little summary on the request. The applicant, as you mentioned in the legal ad, there's a change of use occurring on the property, and the applicant is proposing the change of use from a department store, which see in the aerial, you'll probably know which one, but it's the Cons on Broadway and Pearland Parkway, to a gym/health club for that specific lease space. And additionally, they are proposing to add a second floor mezzanine to the existing building to increase the total square footage by approximately 2,531 square feet. So currently there's not that second floor mezzanine, but that's something that is being proposed in the interior. So there's not a building footprint is not changing. It's just interior adding some square footage. And so the change of use triggers compliance with the requirements for facade, parking, dumpster screening, and landscaping in accordance with table 4.1, which is on your screen. And so you'll see the actions are on the left-hand side. And so that change of use, and we call this a change in use category, requires the following improvements. And in terms of the existing site, the parking is already meeting the requirement, the dumpster screening as well as meeting the requirement, and the landscaping is for the most part meeting it. And if you remember, there actually was a previous ZBA case on this property for an expansion of a building, which kind of covered some of those landscaping. And then additionally, the facade articulation is being met. The one thing that's not being met with those improvements is the facade transparency of that existing structure or the existing facade. And so the facade is the one facing Broadway Street, and the corridor overlay district requires a minimum 25% transparency for that facade. And so the existing, which we'll go through these a little further in later slides, actual images of it, but the existing has 186 square feet of transparency, which is roughly 5.8% transparency. And then the requested deviation or special exception per the letter of intent is for 440 square feet. So they are increasing it up to 13.6% transparency. So not to the 25, but they're requesting the special exception to allow for that to be reduced down. To date, staff has not received any comments in support or against the request. And so here's that subject property. It's that southeast corner of Broadway and Pearland Parkway. And it's surrounded mostly by a mixture of mostly non-residential zonings with general business and general commercial, as well as the subject property being that general business zoning, kind of the light pink. And there's some residential to the southeast of the property. And in terms of the uses surrounding the property, you see largely a mixture of non-residential uses with the church, LA Fitness, Health Club, CVS drugstore, restaurant, and the Lowe's Improvement store, and then some undeveloped land to the east of the property. So just a little bit of history. It was annexed into the city in 1960. The existing shopping center was developed in 1999, and the lot was originally platted as 3 lots. That was then more recently replatted in June 2024 for that building expansion that I'd previously discussed. And then in June 6, 2024, ZBA approved a special exception and variance for a building expansion on the property. And specifically, it had to do with the easternmost building, which you'll see in the aerial. So not this specifically space, but the easternmost. And so here you get a look at the actual Crunch Fitness. And as you'll notice, that's where the previous Cons was. And so here we get a first look at kind of the front facade as you would see it today with that bottom image. And then the most top image is an elevation of the facade. And this is more kind of pointing out, first off, those X'd areas are kind of areas where transparency is potentially possible. And then the red boxed area represents the area that would be considered when calculating 25% of the transparency. So we calculate it from the ground level going up to the building roof line, with areas that are above that being maybe a parapet or it's the roof area not being included because you may not want to see roof equipment with you may not want windows above the roof line showing any equipment up there. And So here we get a look at a comparison between what the existing front elevation has and then what the proposed front elevation. So that existing front elevation, as mentioned, is it's 186 square feet and it's 5.8% of the facade. And there'll be an image on the next slide just of that existing facade. And then what they are proposing is a 440 square foot transparent area, which will lead to it being approximately 13.6% of the facade. And in the applicant's letter of intent, they had mentioned that they're unable to meet the 25% required transparency due to the large arcade and portico that fills most of the facade, and that their reasoning is that with where the soffits are, that they're lower, that the actual area where you can put windows should be the area where the 25% should be considered. So instead of being the roof line down and being 3,214 square feet, they stated in their letter of intent that the area to be considered for storefront windows should be from the soffit down to the ground level, which is approximately 1,758 square feet. And so doing a little bit of math, that 1,758 square feet, 25% of that is 440 square feet. So that's kind of where they're pulling that 440 square feet from, is their understanding of where the transparency would be calculated from. I just mentioned this is where we find the existing condition of the building today. And so the section of the code that relates to this specific special exception is section 2.7.3.7B7 of the UDC, and this is to allow for the reasonable reduction to the minimal amount possible of requirements related to the following improvements, and that's where it lists a number of them, but that C1, the third one, is for facade requirements, so that would relate to the transparency. So this section of the code gives them the opportunity to make this request to the board, and the board has the authority to reduce or make a reasonable reduction. And so looking at staff's analysis, first off, wanted to note that when looking at the transparency calculations, based on the Unified Development Code, it states that facade is to be considered an area of the exterior wall, which is measured from the ground level of the building to the roof line of the building. And that's what the measurements from staff's perspective were based on. So that's where that 5.8% came from, and I believe the 13.6% came from. And while staff understands that the building and the choice of the exterior design is existing today, however, this property is located within the corridor overlay district. And that table that kind of laid out the improvements is intended to allow for incremental improvements as the city expands and diversifies its needs, or you see people move in and out of buildings. So thus, it is important to staff that the corridor overlay district standards are upheld and they are applied equally. If you look across the development, for the most part, you see facades that have transparency, such as the Torchy's. We were able to find the elevations, and the existing Torchy's has approximately 32% transparency for the facade facing Broadway Street. And so most of them have them. The one that doesn't have, that doesn't meet the facade, is just to the left of this building is a UTMB facility, and that facade actually doesn't have as much transparency. So that's the one that's not meeting it. But this portion of the shopping center should have a balanced design that is consistent with the facades of the lease spaces in the rest of the development. And so staff finds that the proposed transparency is not consistent with the other facades of the shopping center. And the proposed transparency, as shown, is more concentrated at the main entrance to the building, with not much transparency on the sides coming off, whereas other lease spaces, while smaller, have transparency along the entire length of the storefront. And so therefore, staff recommends that additional transparency is provided to get closer to meeting the 25% transparency requirement, in addition to providing more consistency with most facades in the development. And kind of going over the next couple slides, kind of presenting some different options that the board has to review, and two of the options are ones that staff support. So kind of first just going through, and hopefully this kind of helps with your decision in the end, because we're going to go through some options and hopefully it helps with kind of making your decision in the end. And so option one is, this is the applicant's preference for the proposed transparency. So option one is as presented. This is what the applicant is requesting, that the transparency be 440 square feet for the facade facing Broadway Street. And then this next one, option 2 and 3, are more looking at if you were to take the existing transparency and just add some transparency to the sides. Option 2 first focuses on if you put it in those openings for we'll call it the inner windows that are right next to that main entrance, you would be able to get to 12.7%. And then option 3, if you put them on the outside, we'll call it the outer windows, that would get you to 17.2% of the facade. And then looking at option 4 and 5, focus on using the applicant's proposed 440 square feet, but then adding those inner and outer windows. And so the inner windows would, if added, would make the transparency 20.6% of the facade. And if you add the outer windows to that proposed transparency, would be 25.1%. And staff, should be noted, is supportive of option 4 or 5 being presented. And so that concludes staff's report. And as mentioned again, you should use those options presented to kind of lay out, as if you approve as presented, that would be the applicant's requested. If you conditionally approve, that's where you're then deviating from there. So just using those as your basis for how you vote. And Lawrence or Martin, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And that concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Patrick. Do we have any, do you have an applicant presentation? Yes, sir. Would you go to the gentleman, go to the podium and state your name and address, please?
Hi, I'm Reed Traphagen, Executive Director of Construction for Crunch Fitness. My address is 2002 East 7th Street, Austin, Texas, 78702.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, I believe we had submitted some slides. Love to pull those up, please. So, first I wanted to start off with just a little bit of history around Crunch Fitness and our way of being that we bring to the community. Our fitness centers are not just something that our fitness centers, we believe in no judgments. It's a big part of who we are as a fitness brand, and with that, it's reflective both in our model, in pricing, and who we allow to come in. In addition to that, we have the philosophy that drives us to create a community that we call a gym. We're looking to bring anywhere between 60 and 80 people, jobs within the community, and our fitness centers will bring in anywhere between 4,000 to 8,000 members. So quite a large community impact that we have that we look to bring. Next slide, please. Positivity, inclusivity, and fun are all important aspects for us. So with this specific fitness center that we're looking to bring, the existing storefront and facade, we wanted just to bring up an image so that you guys could understand the full depth of what the existing facade looks like. What we believe the intent behind a lot of this ordinance is around the architectural look and feel of the building. And so when we look at the balance of what the building, the facade existing has, we really feel that the intent of the ordinance is already being met by this. And so when we go into the next slide, please. When we looked at the ordinance and the definitions of the transparency, in addition to the primary facade is what's supposed to be taken into account, we look at the transparency that's already existing by the archways, and that exceeds the amount of transparency that y'all are looking for. The ordinance also doesn't dictate that there needs to be storefront or glazing for that transparency. So that's one way that we looked at it and interpreted it as well. Next slide, please. And there you can see the highlighted transparency areas that we were looking to discuss. In addition to that, when we look at the canopy portion of the building, we cannot compare it to the rest of the other retail center because of the large facade area that we have. It's not a direct comparison with the other stores next to us. Next slide. Or sorry, can you go back to the? Yep. So these facade elements break up the building's massing and offer a modern and attractive aesthetic, again, without the need for excessive storefront glass. A substantial section of the facade and parapet extends above the roofline, reducing the opportunity for transparency. So it really does limit our ability to add the amount of transparency that we're looking, or that's being looked for from the ordinance. Next slide, please. Our proposal, as stated by the staff, is to maximize the front lobby storefront to the maximum dimensions that we're able to do that, which would bring it to a proposal of 450 square feet. When we look at the actual layout and on the other side of it, you'll see that with our fitness centers, we always have Kids Crunch, which is a daycare center that we offer members. In addition to that, our R&R area, which is tanning and hydro massage, both of which have to be at the front of the building. And we'll get into the reasons specific for that. But if we were to have to add storefront to either side of these, it would compromise the privacy of the children in the Kids Crunch area and the privacy of the tanning and the hydro massage areas. The designated kids area has to be located in the front of the building. Again, for privacy and security are our top priorities. Limiting visibility to the outside is very important and essential for children's safety. We keep the daycare at the front of the building, and this is a safety issue, so it keeps kids from having to walk onto the main gym floor. It reduces accidents where there's heavy and dangerous equipment that could be there. On the tanning and the hydro massage areas, this also has to be located in the front of the building. Again, this is from the entrance is aligned with our check-in and access control procedures specific to those amenities. And this is how every Crunch Fitness that we've built has been laid out, is having these two amenities at the front because of these specific reasons. With that, I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to present our case. And again, we are willing to maximize the amount of storefront to increase the visibility into the front check-in area, but we do feel that we're limited both by the height of the parapet and the amenities that we have to put on the backside.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any persons wishing to speak for or against proposal? We would like to move into staff, commission, and applicant discussion. Any questions or comments from the board to the staff or applicant?
Just to clarify, the applicant's diagram that showed the children's area and the hydrotherapy session, can you put that slide back up, Nathan? Yeah. So there's, looking at this, the actual footprint of the building then would, there's a little, I guess on both sides, a cut-in space on both ends of that. Yeah. And the building footprint does not extend to the left or right more than the blue and the green areas outlined, right?
So my question is to staff. If we looked at proposal 4 or 5, how would it change the look of the applicant's proposal, how they're doing? We talked about the children's area, the tanning. How would that interfere or from that standpoint of view?
And then that may be a question best answered for the applicant because the impact is to their design. So it may be a question more for them to say,
okay,
hey, we're not good with this option, or hey, we would have to do this and that. So it's maybe more along their judgment.
Would you go to the podium, sir, and clarify? And do you understand what I guess you and staff have discussed already, options 4 or 5 in your meetings?
No, we have not discussed.
Would you put
options
option 4 or 5 up? So, and could you walk through, I guess for me, to get a better understanding on how this will interfere with what your proposal for your, yes, option 4 or option 5 here?
Yeah, the requirements would we would install the storefront for the transparency, but you would see directly into the Kids Crunch area, and you would see directly hydro massage beds on the opposite side, again, impacting the privacy of both patrons.
Okay, I understand now. Okay.
Chair, if I might ask.
Yes.
Crunch Fitness has other locations, and it may behoove to question into what they've done at other places. I'm aware of League City, Sugarland, Humble, and other areas that have storefront windows. Maybe a good question to ask.
Yeah, well, I was going to let Gary.
Well,
Gary, you gotta make sure Gary says something first because he might forget what he's what he's going to ask.
well, I was trying to fit in some transparency there that wouldn't.
So why? Oh, go ahead, Gary.
Well, I do have a question. Now, this is going to sound like 5th grade questions, so everybody bear with me. Now, the requirement is for transparency. Are we looking at just a piece of glass, or does it actually have to be so you can see what's going on inside where the glass is? I'm thinking you put up a piece of glass and then you put a piece of sheetrock behind it, but I guess that doesn't meet the requirement.
So facade transparency is the quality of being able to see through the primary face of a building. So I interpret that as a window, a piece of glass that lets you see into the building.
Yeah. Like I said, a 5th grade question, but it's worth a try.
And that's why the definitions were provided in the staff report.
Thank you.
So, sir, in regards to your other locations that's in Sugarland and Friendswood, with their transparency, they got it done. Is it possible you can get it done with yours?
So our franchise group has only opened League City. That's other franchise groups. But specific to our groups, we have always sheetrocked behind and then put graphics on the front of the storefront windows. So we haven't specifically ran into this issue in other jurisdictions with regard to the transparency. Typically what we've been providing for the front lobby area has been sufficient for all other jurisdictions.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions or comments from the board to the staff or applicant?
Martin, can you tell us about some of those other locations, even though they're not the same group as the applicants, but do they have larger glass areas with the children's area behind it and the massage and hydrotherapy? I'm just curious how they'd get around, letting the street view include the children.
Katya, do you have the puck? So Katya will provide that tour around Greater Houston. And I will say our look is just from the parking lot looking in towards, I don't know, I've never been in any of these buildings, so I can't attest to whether or not they have the same children's area and
You can see,
spa components to them.
you can see on this, on the right-hand side there, I guess that's glass is used for advertising purposes.
I want to share that this is the League City Crunch Fitness location. And this is the Humble Crunch Fitness location.
Oh, that raises a good question. So I put in the glass and I say, golly, the sun sure does heat this room up in the afternoons. Can I put in curtains to hold down? Will the city allow that?
Hold on. No, right now, we're only allowed to allow the applicant to have the discussion. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, would the city allow, say, the curtain or whatever those things are there that they pull down, and I could say, well, I have to do that because of the extra cost of the heating from the sun, and that reflects that. Could I do that on?
Curtains are allowed. They are able to be rolled up and rolled down whenever possible. There's not a requirement to have curtains or to not have curtains.
So
what's the current facade percentage that Conn's has right now?
The 5.8%.
It's 5.8%. And the Crunch is wanting to present to get it to 13.7, but the new UDC states 25, correct?
yes, but they take 20%, correct?
Say that one more time.
Proposal 4 was, I thought, it was 20% or 20.6%.
That's the proposal from the staff saying that they can get it to 20% if they're looking at these different proposals.
We provided recommendations that range from getting very close to the 25% at the 20 and exceeding 25%, as staff wants the transparency to be as close as possible, or if not exceeding the 25% requirement.
Right. Let's put up the number 4 and 5 slide. There you go. Oops.
I will add that both of these drawings are just squares to provide something.
And you wouldn't mind if I put curtains behind those or drapes or something like that, would you?
You could have curtains all day long.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think it still eliminates. I mean, if we're adding transparency and then putting curtains, I don't understand why we would be putting the storefront in versus leaving the brick that's there in the feel and the building as it is. And when we look at the viable space that we're able to put storefront in, we are actually at meeting the variance. When you look at the roof line and where we could put the storefront, we're meeting that 25%. Like what's being accounted for right now in the dark red is area that we can't, half of that 50% is we can't even put storefront in because of the existing parapet.
To phrase it differently, I think that the applicant is suggesting, and I think that there's an earlier slide that talks about the storefront, we have a definition of what facade is. Right. Our definition of facade differs from the architectural elements that are provided on the current existing building. The applicant would suggest that that is what's in part causing the problem, and adding facade or transparency to some of those architectural elements isn't going to get you what you're looking for with facade based on our definition. So they would recommend, because of the architectural elements, you remove that from the definition, and then what you can provide ends up being a greater percentage as a result of that. And I'm sorry, Patrick or Katja, whoever's operating it, I don't remember which slide that was that you had. Oh, I think it's too forward. No, it's roof line. So that building roof line there, all the stuff in the upper part is an architectural element that would be difficult to, I think you are suggesting the top part to that would be excluded from the definition that we have in our EDC, in our UDC, whereas staff is saying you could still put a window there. It might be a window to nowhere, but it might be a window.
Correct. It's a voided space up there that is not conditioned or.
I have a question. In this diagram, there is the transparent proposed, and then there's looks to be walls on each side of that. Are those walls or are they columns? Those right there, yeah.
I think that's dictating that the front, it turns out to the front right there. It corners there and goes back and is inset.
So,
inset.
What? Yes, I understand. What? Why can't we go to the entire opening available there? They're leaving square footage in brick?
I mean, we can take the entire from corner to corner. That's not an issue for us. We were leaving area there for attachment for the mullions, and this was just a rough sketch for us.
And what would that, square footage wise, what would that get us to?
Additional 10 to 20 square feet, somewhere in there. It would be minimal.
I apologize for my confusion again. Are you asking if we were looking at exhibit number 3, if we made all of that portion between the columns glass, what would that be, 13.6? Is that what it would be a little bit higher than that?
Yeah, it'd be a little higher. Not like whether it's 10, 20, or 30, it's minimal, but it would add more. Like, it would add more. So maybe it could get up to 15%.
Then I apologize. Was it Reed?
Reed,
Rappigan?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is that, I saw you shaking your head. Are you suggesting that making that area in front of those 2 architectural elements is something that Crunch Fitness is able to do?
Yeah, we would just still need spots to attach the mullions to, correct? So we could take it to the corners, but constructability-wise, you would likely want to keep at least 4 inches from the corner so that we have something to attach the mullion to.
So the sections that are currently displayed with the yes money, that section would entirely be window.
Right, and we're already proposing to take a majority of that. I think our proposal had it 12 inches, so instead of 12 inches, we could reduce it to 6 inches or 4 inches.
And then the height section, looking at the existing condition, would it match the existing window there if you brought it up, or are you suggesting something different?
We were already suggesting going as high as we could.
That's a good idea there. And that way you can get us to, I guess, between 15 to 18, 15 to 19, possibly. Patrick, what? 15 at the most. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, if you had that area just in there, you're probably not going to get up to the 19. I think the 15 is.
15, okay.
And then maybe rounding up still, but it'd be closer to 15, not 10.
Can you go back to the floor plan then, so we can look at it and see what? So it would be that area in the kids area where you'd have glass. That's more than a couple of feet. You may be at 18, 19% if you make it all glass.
Again, I think this diagram, we could go over further to the left. I don't have any issue with taking it all the way to the corner.
Yes, and that would be my suggestion.
I have a question for staff. The reason for the transparency is for safety, correct? If I remember that back when we looked at H-Town or whatever that building was for the...
Correct. So transparency is one of the key issues. You want to be able to have a first responder be able to see into the building.
And likewise, I personally don't want transparency into the kids zone for anybody. Because unfortunately there's more bad than there is good. So I personally think we're trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole here, in my opinion, because we have a company that wants to move in and use unused space right now, and we're squabbling over some transparency that I personally don't see the value of it in the kids zone or in the tanning area for that matter. And I understand there's rules, but we got to put some reasonable thought into this too, because I would hate for them to go down the street and end up in Friendswood.
But that glass is in the check-in area, not in the actual kids area. So I don't see that as an issue.
But I agree with making that front space where the current doors are as big as we can make it in glass and move this kids zone basically looks like a sign-in area, move it over and utilize as much as we can get there. And
Right.
if the police department and the fire department's happy with it, God bless, let's rock and roll.
The other thing to note is our facilities are 24/7, so we would be staffed at all time from a security standpoint.
We could talk about security.
Any other questions or comments from the board directed to the staff or applicant? So in discussion, Jerry has given us another outlook instead of looking at the proposal that was given from the staff. Are we more in favor of looking at how Jerry kind of described it from the standpoint of widening the front as far as they can go and making that for a motion for the staff and the applicant to go forth? Are we talking about that now? Can we make that a motion?
Would staff, is that a good idea?
Staff, is that okay with you?
I would say in the end, it's up to the board, but it is an increase. It is a site that has 5% right now, so that'd be tripling what is the transparency. I'd say I do understand it is a bigger structure, so I would say they are tripling what is existing on the site.
I would support it if they can at least get 15%.
Okay, so let's, Jerry, would you read the motion and adding to the idea that you mentioned? Yes.
I make a motion to approve variance 2025-0125 with the condition that the entire recessed area or wall be or front glass.
It's been motioned. Is there a second? It's been motioned and second. Any discussion?
Do we want to, I agree with Don, what he said as far as the making it a 15% minimum.
And we'd like to add to that, as long as that gets us to at least 15% minimum. Any other discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Motion carries 5-0. And that is the end of the Zoning Board of Adjustments meeting. It is 7:12 p.m.